Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Samyang 85mm F1.4 autofocusing lens for Canon RF. Now, I was really delighted to hear from Samyang that this lens was coming, and I've had the opportunity to use it in advance of its release. The FE version of this lens has been one of my favorite Samyang lenses ever, and so I was delighted to see them bring it to the Canon RF mount where it is frankly desperately needed. Canon has done a great job of delivering some truly premium prime lenses that are best in class. And I reviewed a few months back, I did review the RF 85mm F1.2L lens, and there is also an even more expensive DS version of that lens. But even for the less expensive version, it runs $2,700 US. And so it doesn't matter how good the lens is, that's just out of the range of a lot of photographers. And so to make do, photographers have basically been stuck having to, to adapt lenses to, if they own an EOS R or RP, they're having to adapt lenses to it. And so it's certainly a delight to get a reasonably priced, around $700 US, it's coming to market, reasonably priced but high performing 85mm option for portrait photographers and those that love the 85mm focal length but just don't have deep enough pockets to go for the Canon L series version. So today we're going to give you a standard look at the lens. I'm filming on it right now so you can get a little sense of its performance for video. On the EOS R, that crop factor makes this a really long focal length to work with. However, if you've got the room, footage is great, and we've got some new bodies right around the corner, EOS R5 and R6, that promise to solve that problem and to get rid of that crop factor. And so, good news to come on that front. If you want more details, and particularly a really detailed breakdown of the optical performance, then I recommend that you check out the definitive review where we hit all the nitty-gritty. But today, we're going to give you a more standard overview, standard review of the lens. So let's jump in. Let's start by talking about the build and handling of the lens. This lens is very similar in some ways to the Sony FE version. It is identical in diameter, has the same 77mm front filter thread. It's actually 2 millimeters shorter, 97.5 millimeters instead of 99.5 millimeters. And I think that's probably just because of the difference in the flange distance. That's the distance from the sensor to the rear element that helps to provide proper focus. And it varies just a little bit from camera system to camera system. The physical housing is a little bit different. It's a little bit wider near the lens mount because the RF mount is considerably wider in diameter than what the Sony version is. And beyond that, it also has a slightly different finish to help it to match up with the RF lenses a little bit better, a little bit more matte, a little less glossy than what the FE version of it is. And so it's actually a nice looking fit, particularly with that red ring that Samyang borrowed a number of years back, and of course always looks handsome on a Canon body. And so I won't go into that. But anyway, it's a nice finish, it's a nice fit, and what you're getting here is a lens that is moderately sized. It's not small, but it's moderately sized, and more importantly, the weight is essentially half the weight, a little less than half the weight of that RF version. And so obviously that's kind of a big deal if you don't like to carry around really heavy, bulky lenses. It's a nicer fit in that regard. And again, that'll help it to be a better fit for a lot of photographers. It does have weather sealing, so kudos there. It comes with the lens hood. It does have an AF/MF switch. What it does not have is a control ring like a native Canon lens would here. And so that could be a blow to you depending on how much you utilize the control ring as a part of your use of your camera system. And so I have a lot of good things to say on that front. There's not really a whole lot that's missing when it comes to the build, and certainly its form factor is appealing. Beyond that, the autofocus system is actually a dual linear focus motor, and so there are linear focus motors on either side of the moving group of elements. And so byproduct is that I found the autofocus performance in sound and speed and basic performance to be really very similar to the L series lens. It's not as silent as some lenses with smaller elements. There's some lenses that are just now whisper quiet these days. It's not whisper quiet. You will hear some focus noise. It's not loud. It's not obnoxious, but it's about the same as what the RF 85L lens is. Also, you'll find that when doing focus pulls, there's not a lot of focus noise. We'll take a quick peek at that here. And so you can see that's smooth and it's fairly quiet, and so I don't have a lot of concerns for video use. The manual focus ring itself is actually fairly well damped, moves quite nicely. The actual focus throw is more moderate and seems to be linear in operation. I found that it worked just fine. I don't suspect you'll have a lot of times when you're going to need it. My only criticism of autofocus is the exact same one that I had for the L series lens, and so it may be a little bit more specific to the camera body, and that is that when I had all points active and I wanted to focus on an obvious foreground object, sometimes the camera, if it was focused towards the distance, was reluctant to come back to front focus. And so what I would need to do is to either override by touching on the screen and getting a focus point, or sometimes, moving to a really obvious foreground and then back. As long as the focus was, in that kind of general vicinity, it would be no problem. Another way that I found, however, to solve it, which is probably the better solution, is just to go down to a smaller grouping of points, and it was much less likely to happen under that instance. It was actually probably a little bit better in that regard than what the L series lens was. I just ran into a little bit more with that lens and was a little more surprised by the behavior, considering it was a very expensive native lens. And so I'm more inclined to give the Samyang a pass here because of that. What works exceptionally well is the IAF, or Pupil Detect AF, which worked a treat. And in this portrait series, I shot in a number of different situations at different lengths. I shot in casual situations. iDetect was just bang on and gave me accurate results again and again and again. And so that makes this lens a treat for portrait photographers, because good IAF makes the whole portrait process so much simpler. You just don't waste time worrying about getting a focus point where you need, or focus and recompose, or worrying that if you're composing even outside of the rule of thirds that you may not get accurate autofocus. That's just not the case here. And I shot a lot of portraits at f1.4 at varying distances, and they were all well focused. And so kudos to Samyang on that. That's fantastic. So finally, let's talk about the overall image quality. I used a couple of comparison points in my test. One was to that expensive RF lens, and so I did find that the RF lens at wide apertures did have more contrast across the frame. Surprisingly, however, it didn't really have enough additional resolution to be detectable. And so I don't know that you could look at these images side by side and say that one looks sharper than the other, though you could say that the RF L series lens does have more contrast. And so that's pretty amazing considering the price difference. Also, I compared it to the Tamron 85mm f1.8 VC lens, which, while it has to be adapted, is comparable. It's a quality lens and it's priced similarly. And what I found there is that measuring at f2, to kind of work things out with the Tamron, that the Samyang had a bit of advantage, particularly in the center of the frame, but it had an advantage really across the frame in resolution. Again, not by a wide margin, but certainly it was there. And so the new Samyang RF 85mm is very competitive. And obviously, since it's at such a bargain price point, that is fantastic news. It also has, I believe, very nice bokeh quality, and in many situations has a really nice creamy look and isolation. There will be occasional situations where I saw just a little bit of a jitteriness or nervousness, but no more so than what I see with other lenses. I don't think that any of these lenses yet have the quality of bokeh that the original EF 85mm f1.2 L Mark II lens did. That lens is really exceptional when it comes to the bokeh. However, it's It's got a lot of chromatic aberration, a lot of other optical flaws. And so I believe that this is really a pretty great compromise optically. There is a bit of flare prone in certain situations, but again, no more than what I'm accustomed to seeing with other 85mm lenses. I've tested a lot of them, and I've yet to see one that controls flare perfectly, and that goes all the way up to the $4,000 Zeiss Otis 85mm f1.4. And so, I mean, again, a normal performance when it comes to this. Chromatic aberrations are well controlled. They won't be an issue for you. Really not a whole lot to complain about. There is a fair bit of wide open vignette. It works well for portraits. You probably will want to correct it for other situations. I did note, by the way, that unlike the 14mm f2.8 that came out in January from Samyang for the EOS R or RF mount, this lens is not supported by Canon's lens aberration correction, in-camera corrections. I'm hoping that'll be addressed via firmware update, since the previous lens did have those corrections, but at this point they're not yet available, and so maybe that's on the to-do list for Samyang. All told, however, I think we have got quite a winner here and a great alternative for those of you that want a great portrait lens and love Canon color, love the functionality of the new EOS R or RP, or are really anticipating the upcoming R5 or R6. But you don't have the deep pockets to go all the way to the L series lens. I would say that you could safely say you're getting at least 90% of that lens for really under a third of the price. And that's a pretty great bargain. And so while this may be a difficult competitor for the L series lens, it is going to help Canon to sell cameras, which they really need to do at this point. They need people of all budgets to realize they can buy into the EOS R ecosystem and find lenses that they can afford. So kudos to Samyang for helping to fill that void in a fairly excellent way. If you'll look in the description down below, there is linkage to my full text review that give you a lot of information. There's an image gallery. Take a look at the photos. You see them quickly here, but you can look more leisurely there. There's some great photos that I've taken with the lens, and it makes it pretty easy to do them. There's also buying links if you want to shop for yourself. Just note that this lens is so new that a lot of the retailers haven't populated it yet, so you may have to check back those links to make sure that it's in stock at your favorite retailer, or at least pre-order status, and so that you can put in that pre-order. And so just take a look at that. Also linkage to follow me on social media, to become a patron, or to sign up for my newsletter. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.